Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the podcast from the Mains of Trenton. I'm Mark Leckington, and if you're already a reader of the Substack, you know the project is about clear, documented facts about the slow motion collapse of the Trenton Water Works, a public water utility that serves almost 250,000 people in the region, yet has historically lacked transparency, accountability, and real public oversight. This podcast was born out of that reporting. On Substack, I dig into the documents, I share DEP inspections, reports, compliance records, not to push talking points, but to connect the dots into larger, sometimes hidden stories. The podcast is an opportunity to take that work a step further, slow things down, go deeper, and hear directly from experts, reporters, and people on the ground dealing with Trenton Water Works issues in their communities. Before I introduce today's guests, I want to thank the dozens of people who have made voluntary contributions to my efforts in the form of paid subscriptions on Substack. Without that help, this podcast would not be possible because, as you will see, it's filmed in a professional studio. If you find this content useful and can support it financially, any amount would be greatly appreciated. I'm really excited to share this episode with you. I was incredibly lucky to get two really strong voices in the Trenton Water Works conversation to join me, Jeff Pillets and Mayor Jeff Martin from Hamilton Township. Jeff is a journalist with the nonprofit news site The Jersey Vindicator. His reporting has appeared in outlets like ProPublica, New Jersey Spotlight News, WNYC, New York Public Radio, and The Record. His work consistently focuses on accountability of public systems and the consequences of government decisions that are often hidden from public view. In 2008, Jeff was named a Pulitzer Prize finalist for a series of stories examining waste and abuse in New Jersey state government, recognition that speaks to the depth of his reporting and his longstanding commitment to follow the facts wherever they lead. More recently, and especially relevant to the conversation today, Jeff's written several articles about Trenton Water Works. Those pieces were among the early reports that helped many people, including myself, realize just how serious the problems at the waterworks had become. I'm glad to have him here because this conversation builds directly on the work he helped begin. Jeff Martin is the mayor of Hamilton Township, the largest municipality that relies on Trenton Water Works for drinking water. Mayor Martin has emerged as the leading voice among the mayors of the waterworks customer towns. He continues to push for greater transparency, stronger oversight, and structural reform of the system. Most notably, he's publicly called for the New Jersey legislature to amend the Water Infrastructure Protection Act, WIPA, arguing that the law as written limits meaningful accountability and leaves customer communities without a real voice when serious operational failures occur. He's consistently framed this as a regional public safety issue, not as a political one. And I'm grateful to have him here to speak directly about that experience and what those efforts look like from the municipal side of the issue. Now let's go to the conversation.
Let's get started. I in preparation for today, we shared some emails, and I thought that there's no shortage of topics that we could talk about with the Trenton Water Works, but I wanted to narrow the focus and spend some time on what may be the most serious issue facing customers, and that's Legionella. Before we get started, though, I feel like we need to maybe dispel a few myths and put a little baseline of information out about Legionella. I've done a little research. I actually pulled some information from the Hamilton Township website, which is an amazing Legionella page. DEP has also got a great page on its Trenton Water Works website about Legionella. And what we know about Legionella is that it's a naturally occurring bacteria that can grow inside water systems, especially where water is warm, stagnant, and where disinfection levels have dropped too low. It doesn't usually originate from the treatment plant itself. It develops inside distribution systems and building plumbing when conditions allow it to grow. That's why maintaining effective chlorine residuals throughout a water system is one of the core challenges of every public water utility. Chlorine decays over time and distance, and utilities are constantly balancing water age, infrastructure design, and regulatory time limits to keep levels high enough to suppress bacteria like Legionella. So the presence of Legionella risk isn't unique to Trenton Water Works. What matters and what we're going to talk about today is how system monitors that risk, responds when warning signs appear, and communities clearly and communicates clearly when public health may be at stake. Mayor, I want to start with your first sort of when Legionella first came up on your radar. I think for a lot of people, including myself, it was back in 2020 when there was an announcement that Hamilton Township had several confirmed cases. There was some testing that was being done, and some 20 homes were tested, and many of them were found to have Legionella. Was that also your entry point, or?
So before I was mayor, I got to be 2 years on town council, right? And it even was cropping up. That was 2018, 2019. The issue of Legionella was occurring then. I believe there was lawsuits. My understanding is it even predated that. But certainly, I think to the public's eye and awareness, that 2018, 2019, and especially into 2020 when it kind of peaked, was certainly then becoming a forefront issue rather than, in those first few years, there was disinfectant byproduct letters and boil water advisories. Those had kind of luckily tailed off, and the Legionella kind of took the lead in some of the water issues surrounding Trenton Water Works.
Yeah. So on the ground, though, when this was popping up, I'm curious to hear about what your experiences like were dealing with it as a mayor of a community that had no control over the system. Is your Department of Health engaged actively with officials from the state and Trenton Water Works?
Yeah, so I'll talk in a broader context, right? So one, we have a phenomenal health department. We're led by Kathy Fitzgerald as the director, who's a registered nurse. Our health officer, Chris Helwig, joined us April of 2020. You can imagine what was going on in the world in April of 2020, right? So not only to have to jump right into COVID, but also jump into Legionella and handle it appropriately. And thanks, I think, to the leadership from them and from us and a variety of things, right? Over the course of years, we actually developed a working group on this issue, which included leaders from Trenton Water Works. It included leaders from Hamilton's Health Department. It included Department of Health and Department of DEP, but it also went federally. The CDC was involved. The EPA was involved. I mean, it got to such a high level that the federal government was stepping in to make sure this was solved, right? So it tells you how big of an issue it became and how much attention and resources were being put into figuring something like this out. Because while it's rare that somebody who gets Legionella, it's even rarer than for somebody to pass away. That's an extreme outcome. And so all those entities putting the resources in wanted to make sure we prevented those extreme outcomes.
Could you tell us, Mayor, how initially you say this surfaces in 2020, 2018, 2019? There's talk about it. How does it link originally to Trenton Water Works? What is that initial link to take it to Trenton Water Works? Because as you know, Legionella is pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. So I have to, and I want to be careful, right? I don't think there's ever a way to set up like this is 100%. This is where it came from, all of that. I will say, every time there's a Legionella case that's reported to Department of Health that originates from a resident in Hamilton, we get a notice, right? I get the notice from our health department, who gets it from the State Department of Health. Coincidentally or not, for everybody to make up their own determination, those are almost always, if not always, to a resident in a Trenton Water Works system, whether it's a single-family residence, whether it's a nursing home, whether it's like a multi-unit building, right? I don't think that's a coincidence. But as has often been told to me, somebody could have been on vacation. Somebody could have visited a niece or nephew, right? Like, so there's all sorts of ways that it can happen. And because it happens in a unique way through, steam and aeration and things like that, it can help kind of tailor some of that, but you can never by 100% certainty say it's originating out of Trenton Water Works.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how soon, before the cases started to be reported. I mean, was it in the very beginning? We better look at Trenton Water Works. They have an open reservoir, as you all know. How soon did it focus on them? How soon did we focus on the reservoir?
I don't know if there's been a focus on the reservoir related to Legionella. Certainly, there's been a focus on the reservoir related to other items, right? But as it relates to a focus on Trenton Water Works, I mean, almost like a detective, right? You've got to see, all right, somebody got it. What We know it comes from a water system. What water system were they exposed to, or could they have been exposed to that would have caused this, right? And it couldn't just be, we're recording this in Hamilton. We're right down the street from Pete's Steakhouse. It couldn't be that they went to Pete's for lunch and got a glass of water for lunch, right? Like that wouldn't qualify. So, pretty quickly a focus became on Trenton Water Works because it's showers, it's whether you're shower or bath, maybe washing dishes with hot water, whatever the case may be, right? It's going to be in that hot water system that you're exposed to. Right. And there's only so many places a lot of people are exposed to that kind of water.
It's similar to lead, right? When a kid tests positive for lead and they try to find the origin source of the lead, it's really just best guesses. It's not, there's no way to trace back the lead that's in their bloodstream to a definitive source. It could be, the grandparents' house where they spend time, not just the house where they're living. It could be the playground that they're in, or in the case of Trenton, the school that they might be attending. So it's a similar detective work, and it's not until I guess you get a larger data set that you can really start to kind of make some predictions about where the sources of these things come from. You brought up something, Mayor, that was really helpful to go back to, and that is the idea that there's a lot of different transmission ways that you can transmit the Legionella, the bacteria, into your body. And you're right, drinking water is a very low risk. It's the inhalation of this bacteria that's really the key. So your website's got a great list of different devices that could be in your home that could create these things. One of my favorite ones, and something that we used to use all the time, was a cool humidifier, one that doesn't create steam. It's like, it's so much easier to clean because there's no steam being generated. But that's actually a really great way in which to get to contract Legionella or things like that. So I definitely encourage folks to check out that website and follow through to the Department of Health's website as well on that. I want to talk about whether the strategy that was being used by all these different entities are being deployed to try to triage the situation as these cases are coming up. And it would seem to me that certainly those folks, those residents that volunteered to be part of the test group, those 20 residents were super helpful, right? They probably helped isolate, but I'm not even sure that's a large enough data set. And it makes me wonder how important the field testing was for the waterworks to help inform strategy. Did you ever get the sense that the city was sending data from, looking at the larger picture of data to help inform strategy?
So I will say, as part of the working group, right, and still to this day, there is a working group that meets monthly, right? Our health department, Trenton Water Works, DEP, DOH, to talk about Legionella, right? Sometimes they're longer meetings, sometimes they're shorter meetings, but they're still meeting consistently on this issue, right? So I'm not a mathematician. I can't say what percentage you need, but anecdotally, from our health department, we see a cumulative effect, whether it was, I remember driving past fire hydrants that had the little hose on the end. It was just designed as the flushing system to keep that water from not stagnating, right? To testing also for chlorination levels in water, right? In addition to testing for Legionella. So there's all sorts of testing being done besides just the field test that Trenton Water Works is doing. And I know there's an issue with an employee a couple years ago, right, with the lack of testing. But because there was so much other testing going on, whether it's from private companies or businesses or residents, whatever the case may be, that helped form the data set to be able to drive some of these conversations and try to see where there's trends or just hot zones, so to speak, right. In the town.
Right, that's interesting. So we're getting private information submitted from businesses and things like that. We're also helping.
Occasionally, yeah.
Interesting. Jeff, you did a lot of reporting on the testing issue from 2022 and 23. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. I live in Trenton, and you don't really know a lot of this is going on. You only know when you receive a letter from the waterworks. There's no other way to know unless you work at the water plant, I guess. But we received a letter. I guess it was almost a year ago about there was an employee of the plant. He was a water sampler, and he was He was caught allegedly not taking the samples. He was parking. He was going out in the morning, coming back, parking his car in front of his house, watching Netflix all day, I guess, and then he would take the samples out of the tap. And what he should have been doing is he should have been driving around to like the 600 square mile area. He had 11 or 12 designated sample spots that he was supposed to be taking from, and he wasn't doing it. He was arrested. He was charged. He hasn't been adjudicated yet. The case hasn't come up yet. It's in Superior Court. But the thing about that bothered me the most, I think, was that he allegedly did this for over a year. He ran this scam for 12, 13 months. He collected 125 hours of overtime during that time. But the thing about it was we weren't notified until 11 months or so. Mark would know better, 11 or 12 months after. And that this had existed. I don't even know what prompted the waterworks or
DEP.
the city. Oh, DEP. There you go.
Because they found him in violation.
So it's like, I'm sitting here, and in my mind, the Lugo thing is very important because this whole incident with these alleged fake tests is important because there's a lot of waterworks that have trouble and have problems and need infrastructure and need help and don't have enough money, especially in poorer towns. Trenton's not the only one. But it's always the cover-up. Trenton seems to make it worse by not telling us things we need to know. And I think that's what really upsets me about that. So I think the Lugo thing is really important. Mark, you went on later on and you did calculations that after the DEP released some of their data, showing we don't know a lot of the samples. I don't know how many, 50, 60% had to be thrown out.
76.
76%. Okay, so even assuming 10% of that 76% is bad, what am I getting from my tap water? Yeah. So once again, it's Trenton putting itself behind the eight ball unnecessarily.
And what I think the story that I don't think has really gotten enough attention, and this is super complicated stuff, right? We're talking about cases of Legionella, water testing, data sets overlapping.
Yeah.
The situation you were talking about in 2022 and 2023 overlapped perfectly with Cesar Lugo's falsified tests.
Yes.
So, I was sort of asking a leading question earlier about the idea that whether or not testing was actually informing strategy, because by my numbers, 76% of the data was either falsified or didn't meet the test of
Sure.
a quality test, and that makes me wonder how much time and energy and resources were being wasted with reports that were saying, oh no, there's no Legionella over here. There's chlorine levels are great, and meanwhile there's maybe vulnerable populations that were subjected to Legionella bacteria that shouldn't have been, where proper testing could have informed strategy there, and that just is one of the biggest stories that I've sort of uncovered in my analysis of all this that's really irritated me the most. And you're right, Jeff, the delay in all that data, and then how it came out to the public by DEP just posting the letter on its website among hundreds of letters and thousands of pages of data, where we're left with having to comb through all this stuff and kind of put the pieces together.
Right.
And I certainly understand that DEP's position with making all this information public is not necessarily from a let's tell a complete story and let's put a bow around all this stuff. It's really about getting the information out and making it available. And I think that's a theme that runs through all of it.
Yeah. As a reporter, I have to put this plug in for transparency. And I know that Hamilton is really good on that score. But, in general, government could be a heck of a lot more transparent about what it does. And Hamilton is certainly an exception to that. But you said the run-up to the first case came out, I guess, was announced was it 2022 in October? As you correctly point out, there was a flurry of correspondence between DEP and the water company showing that something's going to happen. You guys, you've been warned. All of a sudden, a case comes out, and what happens in October 2022? They file that they come under state. So it was like the last straw for the state. Yep. My feeling is if a lot of that information, as you say, had been out there earlier, the CDC, for example, I don't know what the heck the CDC's done. You can't find what the CDC, now maybe the mayor has some more information on that, but if that had been out there more, maybe we wouldn't be here now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you said, in September of 2022, DEP writes the city a letter. And by the way, we'll put links to all these documents that we're talking about in the show notes. DEP writes the city of Trenton a letter saying the chlorination levels are all over the place. You're setting yourself up for a situation of Legionella. And remember, this is October. This is the shoulder season of Legionella.
It's not January, February when the water's colder and less likely to breed Legionella.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're right. It popped up over the sort of the cases went over the winter. They went from October to I think March or April of 2023. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the lowest risk of Legionella back then. I want to show you a map that Trenton Water Works shared recently with DEP, and the DEP asked them to provide a list, some information on their testing. And as you can see, these are all the places of where they're testing for chlorine residuals, and all the red dots, all the orange or yellow and red dots are where it's below the required minimum of one part per one part per million of residual chlorine, and the circles are all of the areas of concern according to the city of Trenton.
Wow.
And as you can see from this, there's a huge number of cases in the Hamilton Township area, lots in downtown, and then in the outliers of Hopewell and Ewing Township.
So it's throughout the entire system, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And this data is from when, Mark?
You know, it's funny. The date on this, if we zoom in really close to the bar on the side, it's dated as January of 2025, but it was submitted in November, this past November, to DEP as evidence of the reporting that's going on. There's a couple of other things I wanted to show you guys too. There's it was all part of the same submission. This past November, DEP writes to the city of Trenton and responds to some low velocity flushing sampling that is supposed to be going on. So those
little tubes coming out of the fire hydrants.
Yeah. So the idea is that this low velocity flushing is making water circulate through the system and reduce the incidence of stagnation and the creation of Legionella. And they're supposed to be sampling all of these, providing samplings for all of this. And what they said was that that the city of Trenton had no reports logged in the system from July 1st, 2025 to November, till the September 22 when they wrote this letter. And then they follow up again with...
right when you're in that main Legionella season and the water's the warmest and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's what made me think to show you all this, is that it is just that. It's the most important time of the year. And so they wrote to them and they said, confirm if Trenton Water Works conducted additional Legionella sampling based on recently reported cases, because there were active cases in June of 2025. For example, there were 2 Legionnaires cases in April and June within the same neighborhood of Hamilton Township. And then we get this response back from the city. All right, so this was the response that I got. I got this response last week from DEP because the November 13th letter said, give us the actual reports from July 1 through the current day. And then DEP sends me the response, and there's nothing, they suppressed the item on the letter that would have responded to this. And they said that there were some specific addresses that were listed, and they didn't want to go to the trouble of redacting them. So I said, fine, that's great, but tell me, can you confirm that testing did happen between July 1 and July 2020 and the present day? And DEP says that they submitted a spreadsheet that include LVF data from late October 2025 to the end of November. So we lost 4 months there was no testing that happened for 4 months. And based on some digging that I did on the city's website, the reasoning seems almost ridiculous. The reasoning looks to me as though contract ran out with the lab that was supposed to be doing the testing.
Really?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, I know. So February of 2025, they issue an RFP for a testing lab. They accept bids. 4 months later, the resolution arrives on council agenda to approve that resolution and bring them on board. 4 months later, a contract is signed. The contract is signed, lines up perfectly with this. It was signed in late September of 2025, and we see testing beginning shortly thereafter.
Yeah. I wanted to ask the mayor about that. I mean, when I talked to Trenton officials, I spoke with the mayor last week, and he's very much in a state of denial about some of these things. And I know you don't want to go negative on a fellow mayor, and I understand that. But I said, I'm asking the mayor about the Legionella, and he says, well, if you go away for 3 weeks in the summer and you come back, there's Legionella in your shower head. He said there's Legionella in Patterson. And then he started to cite all these cases, and it is true there are Legionella cases everywhere. But they seem to think that they don't have a problem in some senses. And what I want to ask you is, how much does that attitude of make things worse for you? I mean, if they just took it as seriously as Mark, for example.
Sure.
Maybe we should answer this. Maybe we should get this contract done before 4 months, or maybe we should notify the people. How much easier would your job be? I mean, has that made it much worse, having that sort of nothing to see here attitude?
Yeah, I mean, the whataboutism response, right?
Yeah.
What about Patterson?
Right.
What about Newark, right? It doesn't mean that there's not. There could be issues in Newark. There could be issues in Patterson, right? But what about Trenton Water Works, right?
Yeah.
It would be my response. And I think the frustration really stems January of last year. There's a joint statement put out by all the mayors, right, after the 360 reports. And getting to a joint statement was not an easy place to get everybody, but we did get everybody there. And I thought, personally, for the first time, that this really had an opportunity to succeed, because getting all the mayors to say status quo is not acceptable and there needs to be change. I mean, just right there, saying the status quo is not acceptable and can't continue, I thought was a monumental step. And then over the course of months, to use a pun that we've been kind of it kind of stagnated, right? And that progress that we saw in January, because the report hit, stagnated. And I think so much of what frustrates me is the slow processing of this, right? Look, government sometimes only responds in the case of tragedies and things like that. But if something's a priority, you have to stay on it, right? It shouldn't take, everybody knows government moves slow. Whether it's putting out a bid, whether it's reviewing the bid, whether it's getting the final contract, but an 8-month time frame is generally not what it takes. We up the street a new municipal building coming. That's a $50 million project, and that took less than 8 months, right? Not a simple vendor contract that should be a routine contract year over year. So I think it's that stop and go that's really frustrating me and a lot of the other people involved.
Jeff, could you drill down just a little bit more on the stagnation? Because as you say, there was a point, I guess it was last January, where things looked like, we're on the same page. We have an agreement that looks like the mayor of Trenton says a regional authority might be a good idea, or I'm in support of her. He was going to take it to council. It looked like we're headed for some sort of solution. Then mysteriously, everything goes blank. You don't hear anything, and it seems like it did break down after that. Can you give us an insight why? How did that momentum evaporate? Was it just Trenton just dragging their feet? Was it things out of the mayor's control? Or do you have any insight into that?
I think it's a whole host of things, right? So there was progress in January. That spring, there was good meetings about pursuing an RFP to study how to create a regional entity. I think there was some disagreement of whether that study should originate out of the city of Trenton or should originate out of DEP. DEP's been kind of taking the lead in doing these kind of studies. I will tell you that it was the cost estimates on that kind of project were not cheap, right? And so DEP was willing to pick up the tab for that. Hey, great for me and my residents, right? That we don't have to pick up the tab directly through property taxes. It gets picked up as part of a broader kind of package. And then I think with some people, there's just an inherent distrust with DEP that once that decision was kind of made to go that route, And again, then you get into the cycle of, okay, now we got to design the bid, now we got to put the bid out, right? That kind of took some wind out of the sails. I think there could have been more wind in the sails and more communication between certain people. I can't rewrite that history piece of it, but I think, more and more of what I'm looking at is you can't, especially in the city of Trenton, you can't look at council and the mayor as one cohesive entity. You really need to look at it as two separate branches of government there, and making sure they're kind of all bought in. I have a great relationship, luckily, with our town council. I know the other suburban mayors do as well. And so we can, when I talk to now Deputy Mayor, then Mayor Courtney Peters Manning, I can trust that she's communicating and has the buy-in from her co-electeds. The same with Mayor Bert Steinman, the same with now Mayor Chris Bobbitt and then Mayor Farmer, right? Like, it, for whatever reason, and maybe it's historical, it just didn't seem to happen. I think that took some of the wind out of the sails.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And we've got some great examples of that lack of communication between Mayor Gosiora and City Council. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on with the waterworks that it's just where the City Council is just out of the communication loop. And we saw it with the Frazzle Ice issue this past December, that the city's actively working on it and communicating and having triaged reports and daily meetings, and City Council knew nothing of it until it blew up on social media, which is a horrible way to
It is. It's an ongoing form of. Both Mark and I live in Trenton, and it's just something you learn to live. I've lived there for 20 years. You have too, I guess, and it's just something you learn to live with, and it sort of takes your momentum away, your willingness to be civically involved. You don't want to do it any longer, but I don't know what the answer is to that, frankly.
Yeah, I don't either, right? And I'm sure it doesn't help that now you have a city council member running for mayor against the incumbent mayor who, seems like he's going to run again, right? Like, that breeds distrust, I would imagine, right? And where there's the distrust, whether it's with DEP in the city, whether it's internally that distrust just inhibits communication, it seems like.
Yeah. Legionella, one more question, if I may, on that. Are we in any better position right now when the season approaches than we were 4 or 5 years ago?
I think so. About the communication, right? There is still a monthly meeting going on between Hamilton health officials. I can't speak for whether the other towns are involved. DEP, DOH, Trenton Water Works, right? Again, while there's that communication aspect, Hamilton can't force Trenton Water Works to do anything, and that goes along with what we keep pushing for is some leverage to gain accountability for some of these things. But I can tell you those weren't happening 5-6 years ago, right? So there's certainly an awareness at the state level that this still needs eyes on it, kind of thing.
New administration, have they signaled their awareness?
I haven't talked to the governor-elect about Trenton Water Works specifically, or anybody in her team. I know she's aware of Trenton Water Works. She's aware of the issue because she spoke about it roughly last year at this time. And so, I want to give her some space and latitude. I don't know whether the current DEP commissioner is going to be staying, going to be departing, going to be in an interim capacity. She announced a different commissioner was staying on in an interim capacity. I hope that the same level of attention the current DEP commissioner is giving to it, the next DEP commissioner would as well. I would have to believe so, because it basically impacts where the DEP commissioner is going to be sitting and his or her employees that are going to be working for the commissioner. So I'm hopeful, but I think right now we're just at that little bit of a standstill as we kind of figure out what the direction the next governor is going to take is.
From my research, I do think we are in a better position system-wide for Legionella. I mean, the elements are there to sort of monitor it more closely. The low-velocity flushing should be happening. Although in some communication that I just got from DEP, they went out and audited the low-velocity flushing sites and found only 2 were active of what I think is 10 or 12 different sites where it should be happening.
Throughout the whole system?
Throughout the whole system, yeah. And that was part of that same communications from November. I'm going to be posting a story about that in the coming days. But so the elements are there. There's a low velocity flushing plan. There's a document it's 15 pages long that goes into this discussion. But the problem with all these plans and all this sort of 10,000 foot view work is that all it takes is a breakdown in procurement in the purchasing office to hamstring that all of those efforts with the lack of a lab, for instance.
Right.
With there's been multiple cases over this past fall where RFPs were issued and then having to be reissued and just because of some flaw in the way that they were done. And there's this ability for City Hall to undermine the efforts of the waterworks. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so attractive to me to pull the waterworks away from the city, allow it to have its own procurement process, its own council, if you will, and oversight from a single entity that's laser focused on keeping the water safe and the system reliable. I think that's one of the big benefits.
And
of
all
it.
those issues, Mark, were outlined in the 360 report and the other consulting report that happened last. It all works together. It's not just that the lab is failing to do this. It's sort of there's procurement issues, there's corruption issues, there's bookkeeping issues, there's personnel issues, and it's all sort of working together. And in one part makes the whole even worse.
Yeah, and I think those reports have identified 6 critical points of failure across the different systems, and staffing is one.
Yes.
In addition to just like infrastructure, pumps being 50 years old and other sort of really vulnerable in the fact that maintenance isn't going on in a lot of cases. All you need are one of those things to happen, and then a second one right behind it cascades into like a catastrophic failure.
Right.
Well, I think that's why the DEP commissioner, when he appeared before council this summer, right, kept talking about potential for systemic failure. Because while these low-velocity flushing programs aren't being followed or you don't have the lab, at the same time, they should be working on a plan to combat fragile ice, right? And you run into the same kind of systemic issues, right? So it's not just a one-off. People understand, I feel, inherently one-offs. I always say, from my home, I'm under aqua water. I know what my office is Trenton Water Works. My wife works in the city of Trenton. That's Trenton Water Works. So I'm still surrounded by it all the time, right? My parents live in Hamilton. They're in Trenton Water Works. So it's inbred in me, right? Having to deal with it. But when you're trying to put out all these different things, it's not just one oops that slipped through the procurement process. It's many things that have slipped through the procurement process, kind of thing.
Yeah, even the study that they put out in December to hire a consultant to analyze the intakes and to sort of feed this lawsuit that they're talking about putting together. It's been extended 3 times. And it was originally supposed to be due at the end of December, then the beginning of January. Now it's the end of January.
Right.
It's just procurement seems to be a recurring theme in the things that kind of undermine these efforts. Yeah. I can't help but remember some of the quotes that I've heard up at the dais of City Council saying, basically saying that they've done everything that they can to approve anything that comes before them on Trenton Water Works, and they have a great track record. They've not voted anything down. But the problem is not with that vote. It's not cutting the check that's important. It's all the work that goes on up to that day that is where the gaps are and where focus really needs to be happening, because clearly City Hall's not up to that challenge of expressing the importance of some of these critical procurement items to make sure that the system is functioning and reliable.
Yeah. I mean, I have to wonder, where exactly is the breakdown? I mean, it's clear Trenton Water Works is an extremely easy target. I mean, their record is deplorable. It's documented. But you have to say, my neighbors will come up to me and say, I saw that story you wrote. Why? I thought the state's overseeing things now. And, the state has somebody in there, and I know that it's a very fraught situation in Trenton politically, but you have to ask yourself, where is the state? And, the state is supposedly there. I mean, how much longer? It is close to catastrophic failure. It has been close to that's been documented. And I understand Sean LaTourrette's frustration, but I mean, at what point does the state say, "Hey, enough is enough. We're going to send in our people here. We're going to nationalize Trenton Water"? I mean, is that radical, Mayor?
No, and I think what I'm looking for the legislators to do in one of the most recent statements we put out was to take a look at the WIPA law, the Water Infrastructure Protection Act, because my understanding of it, I'm not an environmental attorney, so take this with a grain of salt, is that only the city can call itself as a catastrophic failure and then start the reformation process that way. By amending the law, the state would actually be able to do that. The state's generally only supposed to be a regulator of the systems to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to. It's not supposed to be affirmatively in, whether it's a water or wastewater system, right? They've taken this proactive step to be. I can't imagine where we'd be if they didn't take this proactive step to be. But that's why, at the very least, there needs to be some legislation to say, hey, if the DEP commissioner determines that it's at or near catastrophic failure, they have the ability to step in. It's going to litigation anyway, so like you have to have all your ducks in a row and all of that. But my understanding is right now only the city council can do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they're clearly not.
It's unbelievable. To me, that's unbelievable. But
and even if it was only impacting the city of Trenton residents, it's a shame that it's gotten to this point. Take Hamilton out of it. I know I'm the bad guy for many people in the city of Trenton trying to take over their water system. I'm not trying to take over a water system. I'm just trying to ensure clean, safe drinking water for everybody, regardless of where they live in the system itself. But just if you don't want to do it for me in Hamilton, just do it for yourselves in Trenton.
Yeah, absolutely. As we get close to the end of the episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that comes up commonly with people in the Substack. I regularly hear from people that read the stories and they reach a level of frustration similar to the frustration that I could hear in their emails, similar to the frustration that I had when I first dug into some of these DEP reports about a year ago. And they want to know what they can do. They want to know, how can they move the needle? What can they do to help influence and motivate, change here? And I know this isn't a simple question. I want to ask it anyway.
So, one, keep yourself informed, right? Whether it's reading the Substack, whether it's reading Jeff's stories or anything like that. I'd say, especially if you live in Lawrence, Hopewell, or Ewing, or Trenton, contact your state legislators. Senator Turner, Assemblywoman Reynolds-Jackson, or Assemblyman Varelli. Hamilton, up and down, from council up through State Senator Greenstein's united on legislation, on a plan of action, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to say there's nothing Hamilton residents can do, but it's not going to have the impact because the people who would listen to us are already listening to us and agree with the Hamilton residents 100%, right? It's going to be for those other people who hear from people inside the city saying, this is just the suburbs trying to push us out and what's historically happened. They need to hear an alternative story, which is, I just want clean drinking water, and I am not confident that I'm going to get it every single day. And by the way, I am confident today. I went and had some water in my office today. I have no problem drinking that water today. My concern is next week's going to be unbearably cold again, right? I think Tuesday, when the new governor gets sworn in, the high is 25 degrees. Are we going to run into a frazzled situation with something else on top of it to where there's no water that comes out of the faucet? That's my bigger concern today than the drinkability of the water.
No, I think that's a really excellent point because I think it's really hard for someone to wrap their head around the idea of reaching for the tap and it going dry. I think it's much more easy for people to think and to worry about the idea of looking at the glass and saying, wow, that doesn't look right or it smells kind of funky. That is something that we're all kind of used to in the system. And and it's something we can all relate to. But when you try to explain to somebody that, no, when I mean catastrophic failure, I don't mean that it's going to be amber colored or funny. I mean, it will not
Nothing.
work.
Yes.
Right.
That is an incredibly difficult concept for people to wrap their head around, in my experience. I've had a lot of conversations with people where I finally think I broke through, and you see the look on their
Right.
face. So like, wait a minute, that's what you're talking about?
Right.
Because even at the Hamilton H2 Open event, which I know you attended, which was, by the way, the most heavily attended out of all of them, the overall sentiment, and this ripples across all of the H2 Open events. I went to all of them, where people got up and said, I don't care what you charge me for my water. The fees were not the issue, and that was the purpose of those events, was to talk about the 14% fee that was packaged in a 60% scheme. I don't care what you charge me for the water. I just want reliable drinking water, and that sort of feeds that narrative that, like, oh, these people are still thinking about the quality of the water.
Yeah.
You heard a lot of people talk about the idea that if you triple the fees, I'm still going to save money. If you triple the fees and give me reliable water, I'm still going to save money because I'm paying $100 and some odd a month to have water brought to my house.
Right.
And so I think that's a really interesting thing to. I feel like that's a big obstacle that I have with convincing people about what catastrophic failure actually means. That the taps may run dry, because all it's going to take is one of these 50-year-old raw water intake pumps to fail, or a frazzle ice incident on top of that, or any number of things. We ran this past December. We ran very close to running out of supply at the reservoir. We're within a day of losing the entire contents of the reservoir.
And that hadn't been announced either.
No.
Until you made an issue out of it, correct?
Yeah. It was part of an OPA request that I did to, following up on. They sent me 2,000 pages of emails. It took a little while to comb through them, but there was a lot of communication about that. DEP was consistently saying, why are you not shutting down the Aqua interconnect and turning on the American Water interconnect to supply water? And they were not getting a lot of timely responses from.
Mark, can I ask you, as a water consumer, do you think that one of the chances that we're going to have, he's talking about this cold snap that's coming up. We saw they announced yesterday they're going to put these new pumps in as temporary as a backup to bring water out of the river. What are the chances that we could be sitting here next week in this dry tap situation?
I think it's absolutely. I think maybe this is a good example. We have a landline at the house, and there's only two people that use that line. It's my in-laws and the city of Trenton for its reverse 911. And every time I see on-caller ID, it's the city. My immediate thought is this is going to be the call where they tell us not to use the water and tell us when the National Guard is going to show up to provide drinking water to us. I think it's absolutely possible, and again, it's back to this cascading effect. It's like a single point of failure on top of some other limitation or other problem it has the potential to bring the whole system down.
Wow.
But so today, right, you've got the county, Mercer County and the city of Trenton working with Cure Arena and a private entity to announce the name of the new Trenton ice hockey team. A great accomplishment to bring professional sports back to the city of Trenton in the form of hockey. What happens, though, economically, right? If you have that catastrophic failure, you're not going to be able to attract another team, or a team's going to look to leave, right? Like, everything is built off of, the Pavlov hierarchy of need, right? Like, you need housing, you need food, you need water before you can even start to think about some of those other things, right? Like, this is such that core basic function of government that allows you to build on those other blocks and move towards those other blocks. That to me, it's hurting so many things by not having it solved.
Yeah. Someone, a former employee of the Water Works, reached out to me once and said that to them the big impact of the failing system is the inability to fight fire. And some simple fire could just turn into a catastrophe and wipe out huge sections of the city without the proper water pressure. In fact, there's some correspondence that I recently got from DEP about the system's inability to provide pressure to Capitol Health in Hopewell to provide water pressure for the fire hydrants up there, and they're There's some correspondence going back and
Wow,
forth. No clear
kidding
picture
me.
on it yet. Yeah.
Wow. Have you heard of that issue, man?
I know there's a resident, and she's looking at a variety of water pressure things. It kind of stems from the Whitehead Road fire we had in Hamilton a couple of years ago. Now, that's obviously an extreme fire. It was the largest fire we've ever had in Hamilton.
Yeah.
But they were literally pulling water out of the Assunpink. Now, you're not going to plan necessarily for the most extreme kind of fire, right? It was a 90,000 square foot warehouse. My words, it was a hoarder's warehouse, right? So, like, everything that could happen and go wrong did go wrong in that situation. And they still had continuous water flow, but they needed even excess to be able to fight that one. But to your point, right, like catastrophic can mean so many different things. It can mean not having water to bathe yourself or to make formula for a newborn or to fight a fire, right? Like all sorts of things just as that basic building blocks start with that.
Yeah. That's a whole other dimension. The firefighting aspect of it is it's just frightening.
Yeah. And kudos to our team, right? We have a great fire chief and deputy chief. When all this was going on last January, I mean, they were on top of it and figuring out what that means potentially for them, should you lose pressure or lose water and all that kind of stuff. So, but it just shows you all the different ways people have to think about these things and how a cohesive government is supposed to be solving these problems so you don't have to think about them.
And just before we wrap up, Mark, I just want to throw out that, Trenton Water Works, the city of Trenton, is also in charge of the lead line replacement program, and that's a woefully behind schedule, and the financing is not there for it. So it's the same entity in charge of that. So all these things are sort of on top of each other over there. It's just another reason to worry.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm at one of the testing sites for the lead in the system
you are?
for that
Really?
program.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, and I regularly test it just below the threshold according to Trenton Water Works. So I've been testing at 14 parts per million of lead in my water. And of course, as if you know anything about lead, any amount of lead is a bad amount of lead. I mean, I'm comparing the blood sampling metrics to it, but still, it's still a major problem. And I think especially if you're living over in East Trenton, which has been declared a Superfund site for lead, the largest Superfund site in the country for lead. It just compounds the problems even further.
Yeah. Fun picture.
Yeah. All right. Before we wrap up, I'll give you both a chance. If there's something you're working on, Jeff, that you want to, story that you're working on, or something you want to mention, or what
I really wanted to stress. Thank you, and I appreciate this. Was great, Mayor. I just really wanted to talk about the lead thing quickly because we're talking about people's health here. That's what's really at stake here. The catastrophic failure. But I mean, there are people in the city who have been affected by lead. Children have been affected by lead for decades, and I'm not sure we have that. I'm not sure. You talk about dysfunction in city government, in government in general. I think you could probably find the same thing with the treatment of lead and the replacement of lead and the management of the hazard of lead. I know we have a Superfund site now or potentially now in East Trenton, but it's just people need to be aware of that because in some senses I think the emergent situation at the waterworks has sort of overshadowed the continuing threat from lead from our pipes and our infrastructure.
Yeah. The East Trenton in particular has been struggling with gathering data and getting kids tested. From what I understand,
right.
There's a huge barrier to parents approving having their kids tested, despite it being a requirement of every kid under 6. And the data is horrible. Lead happens to be a project or a concept that I've always been very passionate about, and especially from the home renovation side and the presence of lead in paint and those sorts of things. So it's definitely near and dear to my heart, and it worries me as well. You're absolutely right. This sort of distracts from that environmental problem and the impact that it has on kids on a really long term. I mean, you can get Legionella and recover from it and be fine.
Right. You
get to a point of blood level contamination of lead, and for the rest of your life, you are having impacts from that.
Yes.
I read once that for every $1 that's spent on removing lead from a home is worth $80 in the treatment of that kid's poisoned child over their lifetime from special education, to the likelihood that they're going to be in the criminal justice system, to underemployment, to all the way through their entire life cycle. So it's probably the best area that you could spend municipal dollars as far as I'm concerned. Mayor, did you have anything you wanted to add? Or
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Jeff, for your reporting and staying diligent on this. Mark, kudos to you for taking this up and doing your Substack and really giving people a coherent, synthesized place to kind of get a lot of this information. I feel the frustration of so many people. And I know people are frustrated and they lash out with that frustration. You mentioned the H2 Open. I think a lot of what was happening in Hamilton that night was just a venting of frustration. And we tried to cool down the temperature a little bit. And I think
you did a great job of that. And right before you spoke, I thought to myself, I think someone's going to throw a chair. Like, I legitimately worried about the safety of the people presenting from Trenton Water Works, and you did an amazing job at bringing that temperature down. I was just talking about that before we started.
But I think that comes, and I don't want to. I specifically want to say I don't want to demean the current city council. I don't want to demean the current mayor. As I describe it, this is a hole dug over decades, right? And so whether you're talking about lead, whether you're talking about Legionella, whether you're talking about intake, whether you're talking about superchlorinated, whatever it may be, Ewing, I know, is a big problem with water mains and them bursting. Like, this is what happens over decades of either mismanagement or low funding, right? And so even if we got a regional entity tomorrow or Jan 1 of 27, like, it's still going to take time. But hopefully you eliminate some of those process issues to really start to fill in that hole and get it to a better place. But in the meantime, please keep people informed. For anybody listening, please read Mark's Substack.
Yes.
Please, again, contact your legislature. If you work in the Trenton Water Works area, talk to your boss about it, right? Like, people just need to continually hear a drumbeat for them to understand the seriousness of it. So I know many of you reach out to me. I can't respond to every email I get, but no, we are on top of it. We hear you, and we are just as frustrated as you are.
And I just want to jump on that about the Substack. I mean, there's a lot of Substacks out there that are, less helpful than others, maybe bloviation, but this guy, and this comes as a reporter, this guy has really collected a lot of data, and he's on it every day, and it's really helpful. And I when I read it, I'm very happy that it's there as a resource because we need it. But the other thing, I'm sad the fact that it shows how much local reporting has diminished over the years, because that was the work of local reporters. And when I started out over 30 years ago in this business, there would be someone on this like that every day, and now we have to rely on a private citizen to do it. So I mean, check it out if you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you both. With that, we'll conclude today. Check the show notes in the comments for links. If you have the opportunity to like and subscribe to this on both YouTube and Substack, that would be fantastic. Really appreciate everybody's support, and thanks, guys, for joining me.